we had bought a cable system in Long Island, and we felt that Long Island was a very good market to get into because it had about 10,000 subscribers, and by the time we got through with this, it went up to about 100,000. Because we were offering HBO and another channel, another system, another channel, which I will talk about a little later. But I lobbied, and I became absolutely convinced that the FCC was a depository of incompetence, and that the Congress was really not that interested, except few exceptions, that the only thing they were interested in is getting reelected. I lobbied a congressman, for example, from Oregon, a small place in Oregon, where we had a cable system. And I saw him, and there was an issue with the telephone company in that area. And he said, "Ralph, don't worry about it. I will not vote for this. Don't worry about it. I will not vote for it." Well, the telephone companies bought advertising in all the newspapers in the area, one-page ads in newspapers, explaining why they have that position and that he opposed their position. When it came to it, he voted for it, of course. There was one exception, was Tim Worth. He was a congressman from Colorado who later became senator, but he was favorably inclined because he saw some of the problems. As a matter of fact, he's being recognized by some award for cable, from cable, this month. And we acquired cable systems, and we increased our syndication, and particularly overseas, when one day I got a call from Washington, our lawyers, and I was out of New York, and I was told that the Justice Department had sued ABC, CBS, and NBC on antitrust charges, including Viacom. And I asked the lawyer to see the people at the Justice Department who instigated this, to ask why we were included. And the response he got, well, they're part of CBS. I got very upset because the Federal Communications Commission had decided that any link between CBS and the new Viacom had to be cut. Anybody who had profit sharing at CBS could not be an officer at Viacom. For example, Merle Jones was supposed to be the new chairman of Viacom because he had retired, but he was still getting profit sharing and pension plans and other things from CBS, and the FCC decided he cannot be chairman. He was going to sue the FCC, as a matter of fact, which he never did. But I went down to see the people at Justice with our lawyers, and we, after 11 hours of negotiation, signed a consent decree which said, if CBS has acquired the syndication rights to the programs we sell illegally, then we will remit the proceeds of syndication to anybody the Justice Department assigns them to. I also found out that one of the reasons that the lead on this Justice Department suit was a fellow who was very upset because Frank Stanton had sent a new release from Columbia Records, which they owned, to everybody else and had not sent it to him. So we signed this consent decree. In the meantime, CBS, at the original spin-off time, had signed a contract which said that they would reimburse us for all costs which came out of lawsuits from this syndication. from this spin-off. So this lawsuit had cost us close to $1 million, which for us was a lot of money at the time. I went to see the general counsel of CBS, and I said, you know, I would like to get reimbursed for this. He said, I'm not going to pay you. I said, what do you mean? It's in the contract. Sue me. He knew full well that a lawsuit of Viacom with CBS would cost us many millions of dollars because they'd postpone it, they'd put all kinds of obstacles in the way. But that was the kind of atmosphere that I was running this company in a relationship with CBS.
Did it change at all as Viacom became more successful?
Not at all.
So it was always contentious?
Always. Until Viacom was bought CBS.
Right. Could you talk a bit about how Viacom was growing so substantially during this period, and what sort of measures and strategies you were taking to see that?
We grew with cable purchases, mostly with stock. The same in television stations. That was the growth. We grew in production. For example, we produced a special which ran on ABC called The Missiles of October, which was the Cuban Missile Crisis, with Charlie Sheen, not the son, the father, and good cast. It took up a whole evening of ABC, 3 hours. That was very successful. Again, that was sold worldwide and sold to ABC, so we made money on this. So we increased our production, we increased syndication, we produced first-run syndication. I went to Goodson Todman, and I said, why don't we revive What's My Line, which had been very successful. But CBS, and we tried to negotiate with CBS for a fee. The first demand was outrageous, and we negotiated, I think, for 6 months to get a reasonable fee from CBS. Then we played the owl game, as they called it, namely the question, who? Every time Goodson Todman said they picked an MC or somebody for a show, somebody said, who? Well, we did a revised version of What's My Line with a new MC. The MC had connections in Washington. He had been working there for quite some time. And I was amazed he set up, and this is typical of Washington, he set up a special screening and luncheon for the Senate, attending a screening of What's My Line and luncheon. And I think 15 senators came.
Could you talk about the biggest programs that you had in syndication that really put Viacom on the map?
Well, I'll tell you in a moment.
Sure.
And we had, as we perceived it, syndication rights to All in the Family. All in the Family was produced by Norman Lear, bought by Bob Wood, who was head of the CBS network for a couple of years. And Bob Wood canceled all the shows that we had syndication rights to eventually. Beverly Hillbillies, which had been very successful.
Green Acres.
All the shows that were appealed to the family, so to speak. He made the decision to put on the air All in the Family. And we believed we had the syndication rights. And somebody came in to see our lawyer, and the lawyer came to see me, and he says, we want to sell All the Family in syndication. Domestically, we had sold it internationally already, and we're selling it, doing very, very well. We can't get the negatives to make duplicates for domestic syndication. You need, you know. I called Norman Lear, and Norman said, "You don't have the international syndication rights." I said, "There's no contract," he said. Most of the shows that go on the network took a long time to get a contract signed. And many times it isn't even signed ever, because they negotiate for so long that. But I found out there was a letter of agreement between CBS and Norman Lear, including domestic and international syndication. And we had to sue. There's a few times we had to sue somebody. And of course, the lawyers that we had never been in showbiz, and they loved this kind of thing. And we deposed Bob, what's his name, who was head of business affairs, Bob Daly, who was then head of Warner Brothers. No, I'm sorry, he's still with CBS. And lo and behold, Bob swore that they had negotiated domestic syndication rights, and therefore Viacom had them international and domestic rights to all the family. And that became, of course, here in this country, enormously successful, the syndication. Not so much in ratings, but stations wanted to have that show. The other one we did was we offered umbrella deals to producers. There were producers who didn't have the money to do a pilot, to organize a company, and needed help. And we, in exchange for getting syndication rights, we put money into the pilots and the other operations of the company. One of them was Tom Werner and his associate, who had an idea for the show starring Bill Cosby. And the show was turned down by CBS and ABC, but bought by NBC, if for no other reason, I suspect, because they want to have a show with a minority in it, or a show that appeals to minorities. And of course, we know the success domestically and on the network with Bill Cosby. And when we put into syndication, the sales department set up market by market auctions as to what station offers the best sealed bid.
Was that usual? Was that the way you
Very unusual.
And why did you have such faith that it was going to command
because we knew that stations would bid all kinds of money to get the Cosby Show on their air. In New York, for example, WOR, which is now owned by Fox, which was not owned by Fox then, bid the highest price for the Cosby Show. I would have liked to see it on NBC, WNBC, or WCBS, or one of those, or Channel 5. No, but Channel 9 bid the highest price. The advertising community was, and we also reserved spots in the show for sale to advertisers. Those were the conditions, and that we made a lot of money on. So did Cosby. I believe our part was in excess of 10 million, and Cosby got a lot more. After that show, Bill Cosby didn't do very much again. He did some things, but he was not very friendly towards corporations. I remember when I was awarded the gold medal of the IRTS, we had a full house in the grand ballroom of the Waldorf, and we asked Cosby, who made a lot of money thanks to us, to make an appearance and spend a half hour. And he said he would do it, but his fee would be in excess of $50,000. And we bought it, and he came out in fatigues with a big cigar and addressed all these, called the moguls, sitting in the audience. But those were the kind of things we made money in. Now, the FCC, again, I found out, was made up of people really not competent. One of them, who is dead now, I can say that, had his hair combed every morning because he couldn't do it. And CBS, of course, testified against us at the commission, and this same commissioner, they sit around, 7 of them at the time, walked out to go to the bathroom or something. And Arthur Taylor, who had been the new head of CBS, said, "Where are you going?" "Well, you don't do that. They can do anything they want." And he looked at him and just walked out. And Arthur Taylor testified that his knowledge of broadcasting came out of books. He was head of he was chief financial officer of International Paper before he was appointed president of CBS. But things started to get very touchy at the commission. And finally, we decided, we had formed a group, the Pay Cable Group, together with Jack Valenti at the MPAA, who called it People's Choice, I believe, or something like that. But we, the group in cable, were going to sue the FCC. Well, it was going to be called Viacom versus FCC. I went to see Jerry Levin, who was head of HBO at the time, who eventually became head of Time Warner and made the worst deal ever made with the merger with AOL. But at the time, I went to see Jerry Levin, who was head of HBO, and I said, "Jerry, I have a terrible relationship with Dick Wiley, the chairman of the FCC, because I made speeches when he said the doors are always open at the commission for anybody to advocate pay cable and discuss it. At a speech in California, I said, yes, their door may be open, but their minds are closed. And he said to me, you don't lobby, you harangue people. At a meeting of the California Cable Association held in Washington with wives on St. Patrick's Day, Dick Wiley came in and started yelling at me about my lobbying for pay cable. You have ever been there when the whole room becomes quiet and only his voice sounds? And the chairman of the NCTA, the cable organization, came to me and said, look, we can't leave it at that. You have to make peace with Wiley. Wiley is standing at the bar. I go over and I said, Dick, come on. It's St. Patty's Day, let's have a drink. He starts all over again. The commissioner, Reverend Ben Hooks, whom I talked about before, I'll mention names now, who passed away. Became head of the NACP. We bought from a fellow named Sonderling, Egmont Sonderling, a bunch of radio stations and one television station. Television station in Albany, New York. And among these radio stations was a black format radio station in New York, WWRL, which we really couldn't run and didn't want. And we decided that we were going to donate this to the NACP. So I made an appointment with Ben Hooks. The NACP headquarters were in Brooklyn at the time. He came to my office 45 minutes late. I outlined our plan to donate this station. He said, "Oh, I want a radio station." I said, "Ben, it's not the way it works. There'll be a table. We will assign this radio station, give it to you, and the next guy is a buyer, and he'll buy it from you. That's the way it works. So we get the tax advantage of the donation, and he'll buy the station. I don't want a radio station." I said, "Ben, it's worth at least a couple of $1 million to you. I don't want a radio station. How do I get back to Brooklyn?" I called Tom Murphy at ABC, who was then chairman. I said, "Tom, I got a black radio station, black format radio station, which we'd like to donate to the United Negro College Fund, which you chair." He says, "I'll be right over." I said, No. I have a buyer, and we'll come over and see you." And that year, the United Negro College Fund at the annual dinner had me sitting on the dais because that donation was the largest donation they had received that year. But that gives you an idea of the kind of people that were at the FCC. We gave a cocktail party for the FCC at the Hotel Cipriani in Venice, where Ben Hooks attended on behalf of the FCC. There had been a panel that morning about cable, and the former radio and television reporter for the New York Times, in front of top executives from all over Europe, said the only way you can make money in cable in the United States is with pornography. And Ben Hook was there, and I said to him, "Who goes first, you or me?" "You go first, Ben." And Ben spoke a little bit, but I got up and blasted that man. And he said to me later, that same gentleman, "Well, I guess I won't be invited to a cocktail party." I said, "Yeah, of course, you come." But following that cocktail party, the Hooks, Mrs. Hooks and Ben and Commissioner Hooks want to eat at a typically Italian restaurant. Well, she came to the cocktail party in high heels, a hat from Mr. whatever his name was, the maker of hats, with a big feather. She looked, forgive me, like a hooker. And we walked, Ben and I walked ahead of the ladies to get to the restaurant in Venice, and all the people, the workers, whistled at them, because Jean, my wife, and Mrs. Hooks walked together in back of us. Strange agglomeration of people. But I said to Jerry Levin, when we contemplated suing the FCC, I have a very bad relationship with Dick Wiley. I don't think it ought to be called Viacom versus FCC. And Jerry said, "Oh, no problem. We'll call it HBO versus FCC." And on First Amendments, we won. It went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court refused to hear it, and all bets were off in terms of regulating pay cable on cable, which was an enormous victory. That's when pay cable really blossomed.
Now, the next phase with HBO is that they then began broadcasting satellite cable. Can you talk about the impact of that?
So we had HBO on Viacom. We started Showtime. We said we have to...
Sorry, was that Viacode? Viacode was what?
Well, Viacode was the first one we tried on a per basis in Long Island. We called it Viacode. But since HBO did this packaging, we had to give up the per film pricing. And we got into the package business, but we couldn't afford a satellite. So in the beginning, Showtime started with sending cassettes out to stations, to cable systems, head ends. And lo and behold, the first satellite program that was done was the boxing fight in Manila, in the Philippines. And HBO had a satellite doing it from Manila to the West Coast, again from West Coast to by satellite to another place, then by line. Anyway, they worked it out. And I called in the head of Showtime, and I said, why aren't we on satellite? I'll never forget it. Larry Hilford said to me, well, we can't afford it. I said to him, we can't afford not to be on the satellite. And I sent two people in, Ken Gorman and Larry, to negotiate with RCA, which owned the satellite. And we got a deal, very good deal to start, paying less in the beginning and having a balloon at the end. As a matter of fact, we were invited, Gene and I, to go down on the launching of one of the satellites, not the one we were on. And I don't know whether you've been ever at a launch. It is very, very impressive when this noise comes to you. After you see it go up, the noise takes quite a while to get to you, and the whole place rattles. But I had an infected toe, and I went to the hospital in Cape Canaveral, and there was a sadist of a doctor who had to open up my toe, and without any painkiller or anything, inserted the scissor, and I practically passed out. Now I'm on crutches. We go to the launching and the setup for the audience, and then we're supposed to go to a restaurant. We went to the restaurant, and I had parked the car even though I was on crutches. And there's a big commotion, and I see Jean lying, my wife lying on the floor. She had missed a little step and had broken a toe. She spent the rest of the evening with her foot in an ice bucket. And the next morning we go to Cape Canaveral Hospital. I'm on crutches, and of course they won't tend to me. No, I said, here. There's nothing you could do about a broken toe. They gave us some sandals. And now we're both on crutches, and we come back to the motel. It was really an experience. But I was invited 2 days later to put the satellite into orbit. You push a button, and it goes into orbit.
Oh my God.
And Ralph on crutches goes back to the center, and I push the button, and the satellite was never seen again. And of course, it was insured. And that's why insurance on satellites went way up. I think it was 50 million or something like that.
What happened to it?
Some malfunction of the system. So we went on satellite with Showtime, competing with Time Life, which was a nerve, was really a nerve. But Showtime became quite successful. We didn't have the money to invest that Time Life had for specials and things of that nature, but Showtime is still, today has about 15 million subscribers, and is a mainstay of the new division, which includes Showtime. And Matt Blank has done a very good job. So that was an additional business we went into: broadcasting, radio, television. Bob Hughes, whom I had hired to run the Hartford station originally, did such a good job. I hired him to run all of radio and television. In the meantime, the general counsel, Terry Elks, had very good experience in the financial fields, debt, etc., which I did not. So I promoted him, and eventually ended up being executive vice president of Viacom. And as time went along, he doing a very excellent job, and my aging, by then we are $800 million company. I picked him probably to be my successor in competition with Larry Hilford. And I made them both executive vice president, figuring that they'll compete for the job.
And you were thinking about a successor now because you were wanting to shift gears.
I was approaching
slow down.
60, and I had worked day and night. I bought a place near Millbrook, New York, which had a 25 by 55 swimming pool, and I usually swam 30, 40 laps, but I had the telephone right there because it rang Sundays, Saturdays. I always was on call, and I had worked 10, 12, 15 hours a day, traveled all over the world, had contracted paratyphoid in Singapore. I mean, I had put a lot into that company, and I wanted to be chairman and have a president. Being involved with lobbying, etc., advising the heads of divisions, but not being involved in the execution of the business. And I made him, two of them, executive vice president. Larry Hilford one day came to my office and says, "I'm sorry, but I have to leave Viacom." I said, "Why? You have a tremendous future here." He said, "I have an offer from a new system, which is a two-way cable system, which Time Warner is trying out in Columbus, Ohio, called Cube." I said, "What if the system doesn't work?" "Well, I'll find something else, but I think it's a marvelous system," etc. He left us. So there was one person left. That was Terry Elks. And eventually I made him president, and I became chairman. When he became president, I said, "We're going to have the office of the chairman. You'll be president. I'll be chairman. You'll be president." And that worked very well. And one time we heard that Steve Ross at Time Warner he had been in the television game business, and he had lost a lot of money, and he needed cash. And we devised a way to buy some of the cable networks he owned, which was MTV, Nickelodeon, VH1, and we at one point had sold half of Showtime to him, so he owned half of Showtime. And we approached Steve, and he was very receptive, and they began negotiating, and he asked for $600 million. And finally the crew came to me and said, "We can't make a deal with Steve. Please get involved." So I remember we had a meeting, I remember it very well, in the boardroom of Time Warner, which is very elaborate, very luxurious. We just had a big table and chairs. That's why we did business. They had a telephone in each drawer of every seat in the boardroom, for example. They paid the directors an enormous amount of money. Anyway, we had this meeting, and I was going to pay $600, matter of principle. And I began to negotiate with Steve, who was one of the best negotiators I've ever met. And we got to $590, and I started to walk. Just as Frank Packard did in Australia, he grabbed me by the sleeve, he said, "Sit down, I got an idea. I will buy warrants for your stock, so you don't have to pay as much. You don't have to pay $590. I'll pay, and I'll take X number of shares." And I began to find myself negotiating the terms of the warrants, the time under which he can exercise his rights, etc. Well, we made a deal. And we bought these cable networks from Steve Ross, an enormous, how should I say, coup. My board was very nervous about spending $500 and some odd million like this, the debt. But they agreed, and we made the deal. that really sent us on our way in cable.
How quickly before you saw the returns?
I beg pardon?
How quickly before you saw the returns from that investment?
Oh, I would say in a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
Because MTV expanded internationally, they're in 100 some odd countries. Nickelodeon did extremely well, still doing very well. Half of Showtime is doing well. I think their pre-tax is like $10–15 million. The movie channel did well. So
there was a merger between Showtime and the movie channel as well?
Yes.
Why did that happen?
I don't know. I didn't run it anymore at that time.
Okay. And then there was also the acquisition of the cable health network. And can you talk about how you found that and Dr. Ruth? And
that's right. One of our people came to us and said, there's a market for a health network, cable network in this country. And Jeff Reese, who was the man, said, I have assurance that we can make this thing work. It'll go to doctors' offices, it'll be a marvelous thing to do. And we agreed. And we hired not Ruth. Anyway, a doctor to be the head of it. One of the programs was a sex program with Dr. Ruth Westheimer, who incidentally was also born in Frankfurt. She's about 4'11", and with her accent always said, Ralph, Ralph. Very pushy kind of lady, who at one point asked my wife whether she would be agreeable to designing some clothes for her, because she had to go to the girls' department to get clothes because of her size. And that was very successful, but in essence, the cable health network did not work out. And we made a change to a woman's channel called Lifetime. And then we found a partner in ABC. So ABC and Viacom owned Lifetime. I also had a good friend who owned the Law Journal in New York, who was on the board of the Entertainment Channel, which Arthur Taylor, who again had spoken against cable, etc., headed up when he was let go at CBS. They all end up with the people they're fighting, the bandits, the pirates, etc. And Arthur Taylor had convinced a lot of people, including the Rockefellers, to bring out the Entertainment Channel. And my friend, who sat also on the board, said to me, Ralph, I can see that he's doing everything wrong, and he's not doing it right. What do I do? I'm the only Jewish fellow on this board, and if I say something, it'll be misinterpreted. I said, why don't you try and tell him to find a partner? That's an idea. He asked the board of the Entertainment Channel to find a partner, and wouldn't you believe it, RCA, NBC, bought in to the Entertainment Channel. This didn't work out too well, again, and eventually that became the A&E, and they were very successful. So I'm here, I'm chairman, Terry Ellis is president, and I purposely, at many meetings, stayed out of them, didn't involve myself too much in certain things. on other hand, on other things I got myself very involved in, particularly lobbying for other things in Washington. And one day, Terry Else comes to me and says, I think it's time for us to do leverage buyout. In other words, use the assets of the company to get loans to buy the company. Management is doing that. And I said, oh, that's a wonderful idea because we can do this, we can do that, and we'll do this, and we'll do that. He said, wait a minute, you talk we all the time. I put a group together and you're not part of it. If I were you, I wouldn't even come in anymore. You got to realize, Ralph, you're dead meat. Those are the words he used. I was appalled. He wanted to buy the company very cheaply. And I went, the board formed a committee to negotiate the sale of Viacom. And I went to the two people who headed up this committee, and I said, look what's done. They were unbelievably angry. But they had a duty not to protect me, to protect the company. And whether they had to decide whether that deal that Terry Else offered them was the proper deal. Well, a fellow named Sumner Redstone read about this, and as he said or wrote in his book, he said that he felt that Terry Else is trying to steal the company. Sumner had made a lot of money buying stock when companies were under pressure to be bought or sold. 20th Century Fox and other places made a lot of money. Owned theaters throughout the country. Had a persistent, stubborn trait, illustrated by the fact that when he was in the hotel room in Boston where he lived, I assume with somebody else, a fire broke out, and he was caught in the room and held on outside with both hands and watched his right arm burn partly. He now plays tennis with a certain device so he can hold the rackets better. But he heard about this, and he apparently was outraged and got Merrill Lynch together with him and to buy the company and improve the offer that Terry Else had made. They outbid each other for quite a while. I'm sitting on the sidelines. Terry Else becomes more and more, how should I say, aggressive, not aggressive, nasty to me. For example, I had a company car, and Jean was driving it and had a blowout, and the car was totaled. Fortunately, nothing happened to her. And my contract said I'm entitled to a company car. So I went to him and I said, I have to buy a new car. He said, why? I said, well, the car's been totaled. He said, yeah, you have a car.
How did this all make you feel? I mean, this was someone you...
Terry Else, I considered at one time my friend.
Yeah.
Mrs. Elks, who's also deceased, was always part of, if we had a company dinner that we had to take a table at or whatever, we always included them, even though she was not very social, to speak. I'm being kind. For example, she said to Jean, I'll never wear anything, including long gowns that I can't put in the washing machine. Their son wanted to go to the London School of Economics, their oldest son. The London School of Economics was headed up by the former head of the BBC, whom I knew very well. The only person in the business who called me Rafe. But he applied too late. And Elks came to me before all this, said, "Can you help?" I put wheels into motion. He was accepted at the London School of Economics. I took him on we had a boat that we sailed, crazy enough to do that. We had adventures you would not believe at times, but we came out all right, obviously. But I took him on the boat. His son, his youngest son, watched the baseball game on the little television set we had and went through all the ice on board in one day. It was very hot. We had to stop off somewhere to get more ice. He smoked the pipe constantly. At a luncheon, he put the tobacco pouch, the cleaner, and the pipe on the table and began to smoke the pipe while you were eating. But I had a barbecue every year for the top 30, 40 executives and wives up in the country. I put up a big tent, had a band, put ourselves out, really. I consider him a friend, and I was very angry. But anyway, Sumner comes in, and we organized every year a picnic for about 500-600, getting buses, and that trend continued when I became chairman. And right after Sumner made the office, we had the company picnic, and Sumner stayed. He lived at the what's that hotel on 78th and Madison, where Kennedy also had an apartment. And we live at 74th and Park. So I called him. I said, "You're right there. Can I give you a lift?" And I rented a little black car. I went out to picnic, and Elks, I see Elks beating up on him and trying to convince him. And then I heard that he told Sumner that Sumner could not operate Viacom without him, and he would be willing to work for Sumner for 25% of the stock in Viacom. And Sumner didn't think that was appropriate. And I went to this picnic with him, and Elks tried to sell himself to Redstone. But I became very depressed seeing all these people and what I had accomplished, and I see it go down the drain. So I said, "Sumner, I'm leaving. Can I give you a lift back?" He said, "Yeah, I'm going to." And in the car, he wanted me to work for him. And I'm driving on the Jersey Turnpike. I said, "Sumner, this is not the place to discuss while I'm concentrating. I'm driving to make a deal for me to work for you. I mean, this is my future." Well, he continued. At one point, we agreed to disagree. And at some point, he asked me who would I recommend to run the company, because he's not going to have Terry Elks run it, obviously. And I recommended 3 people. 2 of them, one of them was Frank Biondi, the other one was Bob Daly, and another person. And eventually he hired Biondi to run it. And he always called it Viacom. And Terry Elks had a meeting with him and practically threw Sumner out. And on the way out, Elks said to Sumner, "Incidentally, around here we call it Viacom." Well, when Sumner had asked him to vacate his office so he can take it, so he can use it, And at one point, they always had another disagreement, and Terry was going towards the door. Sumner said to Elks, incidentally, from now on around here, we call it Viacom. And that's how the difference came up. And he ordered every tale of every show to show the new logo of the company, which was Viacom in words, and a voiceover said Viacom. So this was impressed on people, I don't know, 30 times a day in all the markets we did syndication in.
Aside from, I mean, I'm sorry, but the personal, obvious, and emotional disappointment, I mean, professionally, what was it to see a company you had essentially built, you being forced out of, and how hard was it for you to leave?
It is a terrible feeling, because as I said at the picnic, I saw everything going down the drain and a complete change in this company which I had built. And to one man whose greed dictated that he wouldn't make me part of it. Some of the people had suggested it apparently, and he vetoed it. He made himself CEO of his new company, and he vetoed my having any part of it. He didn't think he needed me. If he had made me part, some of the board members who were inclined not to go along with him would have. But he did it in such a poor manner, and the way he went about it with the board and so on, and with me, that they weren't going to let him have the company. And besides, Jack White, who was one of them, and Alan Johnson, who was the other one. Alan was head of Saks Fifth Avenue at one time, and he was on my board, and very friendly to me, with me, and also with Jack White, who was head of, at one time, Cooper Union, and also Channel 13, amazingly enough. And they both said to me, this is outrageous, and he said, they're not going to get the company. And besides their duty to examine each bid to do the best, very best for shareholders. So they outbid each other, and Else comes back to me, sits down, and says, oh, I'm sorry, no, I had to make an appointment. We had the office next to each other, and we never, I went in, I put my feet up on the desk, and we chat about some problem or other. Never, this didn't happen. I had to make an appointment. He wanted to see me, and I had to make an appointment. I went in, and he said, you have a 10-year consulting contract. If you don't support this, I will not honor your contract. And Ralph, you'll probably sue us, but I must tell you, I think the company can take the suit much longer than you can.
Wow.
That put the crowning blow on anything. At that point, I supported Sumner. And the last bid was to be made on a certain day, and we were in the law of, and we were in the law offices of our lawyers when Sumner's bid was accepted by the committee. And now he bid $55.50 a share. Now I must illustrate that. When Viacom was admitted to the New York Stock Exchange, our shares were about 10 or 11, went up to 15, 18, because every year our profit, our net was better than the prior year. And at some point, a scandal erupted in the cable industry, sparked by a fellow named Irving Kahn. he was indicted on the basis that he had bribed the officers of the city of Johnstown, Pennsylvania, to give him a cable franchise. He said it was extorted. They wouldn't give it to him without him paying. And I said, what's the difference between bribery and extortion? It's whoever thinks of it first. But he was given a jail time, and he served his jail time as head of a marina in Florida. But it affected the cable industry, and our stock went to a low of 2 5/8. That's the low it ever reached. I wasn't a wealthy man, but I tried to buy as much as I could for myself, for Jean, for some of the children. We split, since that time, we split the stock twice, so that in 7 years from that time, when Kahn went to jail, Kahn went to jail in 1975, I think. No, 12 years. So $55.50 a share, split twice, is 111 times 2. The second, $222 a share, from 2 5/8 in 12 years, maybe 10. So we did very well for the shareholders. And I had an office and a secretary, which was in my contract, and a company car, etc. And they gave me an office, decent office, and I maintained that for long past the 10 years, I guess, because they recognized what I did for them. They got a company which was running extremely well and made a lot of money. And about 2 years ago, I got a call from Human Resources that my office would have to be vacated and that my phone would be cut off in 10 days and that my secretary would be terminated. She was with me at that time for 29 years. Her husband had just lost his job. So I took it upon myself to write a letter to a fellow named Tom Dooley. I don't know whether I mentioned him to you. I said, look, I made this deal, that deal, this deal. You really ought to consider what I did and reconsider what you've decided. And I personally delivered that letter to Viacom. He never answered. So I set myself up here in an office, which I used 2 days a week, and I hired Janice to work for me.
The same secretary.
I had been on the board of various organizations which, from my personal point of view, were very important to me. I was a member of the Carnegie Hall Board of Directors for a very long time. I was chairman of their centennial in 1991, organized that. I was on the nominating committee. I was on the new communications committee, on the development. I was chairman of the development committee at one time. And that was under Jim Wolfenson and under Isaac Stern. Isaac became a very good friend of Jean's and mine. As a matter of fact, we celebrated our 30th anniversary by underwriting the revival, which I thought was very appropriate, of gay divorce, and gave a black tie dinner afterwards in the Rohathan room at Carnegie Hall, and Isaac spoke. And when Isaac speaks, you'd cry. He does it very, very well. But Sandy Wilde came in to head up Carnegie Hall, and there's some things I completely disagreed with. And Jerry Spire, who was then head of nominating committee, I wrote to him and I said I will not stand for re-election to the board. He called me into his office, beat me over the head for close to an hour to stay on, and I said I would think about it. I wrote him back, no, I'm not going to run for re-election. So it made me an honorary trustee.
Let's hold it there, and I'm going to change